Ich habe die Ehre, Ihnen den pakistanischen Premierminister anzukündigen, Herr Shaukat Aziz. Er wird Ihnen in den nächsten 5 Minuten einige persönliche Worte weitergeben. Anschließend werden wir hier dieses nächste Panel eröffnen. Bitte, Herr Prime Minister.
Please, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real privilege for me to be addressing this open forum in Davos, where many of us have come to attend the World Economic Forum. I have been attending the forum for the last 15 years, and it is an excellent gathering to exchange ideas on every subject. I think naming it the World Economic Forum is a bit of a misnomer, because we discuss everything: politics, religion, economy, and any challenges facing the world and the human race. Ladies and gentlemen, today, very briefly, I will just share some very brief thoughts on the whole issue of religion and interfaith harmony. I believe religion is a great unifier for humanity. Religion is a reason for peace. Religion is something which we all treat as sacred. There are many religions of the world. It doesn't matter whether you pray in a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a temple, or wherever else. What matters is the common faith or the common values which transcend religions. Religion also crosses borders, crosses cultures, crosses civilizations, and can be a great unifier. Now, in the area of religion, if we just step back and think, every religion in the world propagates peace, harmony, and interfaith understanding. Every religion in the world protects the rights of people, gives them a voice, and wants the world to be a better place to live in. So there is so much in common, yet sometimes we have tension due to religions. Sometimes we have a lack of understanding. Let's reflect on why this happens and what we can do. Ladies and gentlemen, religion, when it does create or bring people together, some people may exploit it for their vested interests. We must never allow this to happen. Religion should be kept out of the political field, and religion must always be used in a positive way. We also have to be sensitive to each other's religions. If people's religions are different, no other religion or no other person should make remarks which would hurt the other religion. We have seen examples of that, statements, caricatures, etc., which have hurt many religions. That doesn't build interfaith harmony. That doesn't build a safer world and a peaceful world. Also, in many cultures, in many societies, in many countries, religion provides a forum for everybody to come together. And that has to be used in a positive light. When people come together, it is up to each faith to propagate peace and harmony. Today, ladies and gentlemen, in my view, the biggest challenge facing all of us, where each individual, no matter what you do, where you come from, and what you believe, and which faith you practice, can play a role. And this challenge is the growing divide between faiths and the lack of interfaith harmony. What is causing this? A lot of factors are a result of a lack of interfaith harmony. There are conflicts in areas which are not resolved. So people get disillusioned and they blame other religions for their problems. In some areas there may not be income and economic growth, which causes a sense of dissatisfaction and creates a divide. We also have to work harder to solve conflicts and to solve the challenges which the world faces. So what can we do to bridge the interfaith gap? More communication, more sessions like these, more exchange of ideas, the role of the media, the role of civil society in every country to bridge the gaps. Also, in some countries and cultures and faiths, people link certain religions to violence. For example, if you read the press today, There are many intelligent people writing articles or giving commentaries on the linkage of Islam, a religion, my religion, I practice Islam, with violence and terrorism. Nothing is further from the truth. Islam propagates peace, Islam propagates non-violence, Islam propagates harmony and solving disputes through dialogue. But at the same time, people may misuse this, because if we don't have disputes settled in an amicable manner. Let me give you the example of one dispute, the issue of Palestine. This has been festering for a long time. The people of Palestine have suffered. The people of Palestine have paid a major price. But the world has to move and get some resolution going. So to the average Palestinian, no matter what religion they follow, and by the way, in Palestine there are Muslims and Christians and all sorts of religions being practiced, but people have a sense of frustration, deprivation and neglect, and that causes them to look at the world in a very different way than probably you and I would. So the biggest threat facing humanity, in my view, is the risk of lack of interfaith harmony, and the biggest opportunity for us to fix that is to get everybody together and to solve disputes, provide equity, provide justice to people, give them a voice, to remove that sense of deprivation. If we are successful in doing that, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a safer world, a more friendly world, a more cooperative world, a more congenial world. And let us resolve to work together. Let us resolve to do whatever we can to bring the faiths together, bring society together. Because if we bequeath to our children a world which is full of religious divide, a world which is full of lack of trust and unity, then we will pay a huge price in the future. I know it can be done. I think if all of us decide to respect each other's faith, to respect each other's rights, to solve problems, to give people justice, give them empowerment, remove deprivation, I think we will move towards religious harmony. And as I said when I started, the common thread in all faiths is peace, justice, harmony, and let's build on the similarities. And whether we pray in one way or the other, the truth is that most of the prayer is similar. So I would appeal to all of you, young, old, generation from all over the world and from Switzerland particularly, that let's play our part. Let's not say, this is not my problem, why should I worry about it? It is everybody's problem and it is everybody's opportunity. And if we want a safer world, a better world, a peaceful world, we must address the issue of interfaith harmony. And today's discussion, which I'm looking forward to, will be a step in the right direction. Let me congratulate the organizers for having this event today, because it brings so many faiths together, all sitting together, trying to find a solution to look and find a better world. And if we find a better world, we will have peace, progress and prosperity. If for some reason we don't, then the implications are very serious. Let's resolve, think positively, and let's work towards a peaceful world where all faiths live together, next to each other, and create a better world for us and our coming generations. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, at all times, religions have been used both for good and bad. They've been used for the good and misused for the bad. I warmly welcome you to this further session of the Open Forum 2007. I see that you've turned up in great numbers, and in addition to those who are watching on the screens or on the internet. Are religions a source of peace, or are they a cause of violence and war? This is, without a doubt, one of the hottest issues of the current day. In his remarks, the Prime Minister of Pakistan has already expressed this most eloquently. I'm very happy to have a highly qualified panel here and to welcome them to this session. If I don't speak perhaps from time to time as rapidly as I do on television, it's because I would like to give our colleagues, the interpreters, an opportunity to help us all to understand better when different languages are being spoken. Now, let me begin by introducing Ms. Gret Haller. She has teaching duties at the Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main, and I hardly need to introduce her at any greater length to the Swiss present here. She is a high-profile politician. She has been in the National Council, and she was also the National Council President, the highest office in the land. She was a parliamentary MP. And she has acted as a diplomat for Switzerland, too. She has been in Bosnia, a very high-profile role there, and had to say some uncomfortable things from which she is well known. So we're very happy to have her, and be able to welcome her here. Could I ask you, right at the start, what technical relationships you have with religion? I understood that you've withdrawn from the church, you've left the church. Well, I've actually joined the church again, but I'd like not to speak about that today. When people talk personally about these things, very often this has a negative connotation. Rather, I would like to discuss what is to be done about religions or with religions, how it can be brought into public life so that doesn't happen. Do you pray today, if I may ask? Do you say daily prayers? Well, I've just told you why I don't intend to answer these questions. Well, next to her is sitting Farhan Nizami, who is director of the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies in the United Kingdom, a prominent person in Europe on these issues. He's been in this post for 20 years. 20 years he's been director of that institute. And since he's been active in the University of Oxford for 27 years. So could I also ask you, do you pray daily? Okay, in that case we can move quickly to the next, our next guest, if maybe we'll get a similarly clear reply. The Archbishop of Dublin, Diarmuid. He has a long and interesting career behind him. As a Catholic representative, he was a representative of the Holy See at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, as well as at the UN. As I have been informed, he was consecrated bishop by the late John Paul II directly. Is that correct? And do you normally receive this consecration directly? Yes. Well, in fact, I worked for some time in the Vatican, and I got to know the Pope in the course of those years. But it was a very special event for me. Well, today you're back in Dublin, and of course you'll be in a position to tell us a great deal about the conflicts among Christians the very bloody conflicts which have taken place in that country, as we all know. Maybe we will be coming back to that subject here. And if I might offer a brief comment on the time. After 45 minutes of this panel discussion, not including we're already running a bit late, to give you an opportunity to be able to take part in the discussion and to ask questions. So in the second half, we also have a whole series of students from the International School of Geneva who are with us. And I shall invite those students to put their questions. Now, I'd like to come round to Konrad Reiser. You are one of the most active people in the ecumenical scene. From 1993 to 2003, 10 years, you were Secretary General of the World Council of Churches. Could I put it in those terms? Would you agree to that? Well, it's not the economic, the ecumenical council of the churches. Well, this ecumenical church council is often presented as being the same thing as the World Council of Churches, if you look at the various sources. Anyway, Konrad Reiser is a visiting professor at the Ecumenical Institute of Bosse, and West. Would you like to describe your daily work? Well, it's the normal rhythm that any academic teacher has. I have to prepare lectures. I have to talk to our students. It is lively, animated, as it is with students anywhere in the world. Well, as you were extraordinarily busy for 10 years, so I take it, therefore, that he looks pretty well. So I imagine that nowadays he has a bit more time for himself after his 10 years stint as Secretary General. Do you pray daily? Could I put that question to you too?
So, meine Damen und Herren.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we know who prays and when. Sources of peace or cause of violence and war, Gret Haller. Do you see religions as a source of violence and war in politics? I can only associate myself with what was said by way of introduction. Religions can be used to instigate war or to promote peace. It depends who is doing it. And I think an important element in this question is as to which direction it goes in. The important element is how religion is integrated into the public order, how it is incorporated or embedded in the public order. I think that's the question you have to ask. How religion is integrated into the public order. Well, could you pin that down a bit? Well, the reason I put it in such clear terms is that if a religion presents itself as the public order, there is only one public order, one social order in a given place, then when the religion aspires to be the public order, then that doesn't work, because the various different religions then come into conflict. So we have to ask fundamentally, what does incorporation or embedding mean? What does it mean to incorporate or to embed religion in a public order, in a greater framework, where human rights have something to say or have a role or not? That, I think, is the central issue, which it at least needs to be discussed. I doubt that it'll be resolved anytime soon, but that is the central question. And if we can make some progress on that issue, then I think some of the violence which is used in this world might be reduced. Well, what about you, Mr. Martin, or Archbishop Martin? You've lived through a period when religion certainly was being misused as a source of violence, and do you see that being extended? Well, of course, when we talk about Ireland, we're talking about Northern Ireland in particular and the religious conflicts there. But Northern Ireland, too, in recent years, has become a workshop of reconciliation, and the religion has played a particular role in that process. A workshop of reconciliation where two communities that have been divided are very slowly and with much patience beginning to come closer together again. And the religious leaders, I think they were the first to do this. And so sometimes it was very difficult. Sometimes they even had to meet abroad because it was dangerous for them. But the religious leaders played a leading role in that process. But now it's up to the politicians. The religious leaders can still do a great deal in the field of reconciliation and mutual understanding. But it does come a point where the politics has to take over, and that is what is now happening in Northern Ireland. It is the politicians who are in a position over and above or outside their own particular tribe to grow beyond their own particular tribal affiliations and to take on a new leading role, a leading political role, and also to fashion new structures because religion always has a great deal to do with identity, personal identity and group identity. And if somebody feels that their identity is under attack, then things get unpleasant. So we have to find a new area, a new place where we all belong to this new political and economic future, economic as well, because Northern Ireland, the situation in Northern Ireland also has economic roots, and there was a war for jobs, in fact. Could you say something a bit more in response to the question about religion as a source of violence in world politics? For example, Islam or parts of Islam or radical cells within Islam are often perceived worldwide as a source of trouble or violence. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the media coverage of those issues? Do you see the media playing a role in this?
Well, let me make a general point first. I think every religion unleashes two trends. One, what you might call believing, and one is belonging. And it is the belonging which is the problem. But that is not the exclusive preserve of religion. Secular ideologies generate that belonging more. And unless they are sobered down, if you like, by believing, they can be more dangerous. And one can give many examples in modern history, in European history, where that belonging has been a problem. It's not the believing which is a problem. Certainly in the case of Islam, as the Prime Minister outlined, I mean, the very name Islam talks of peace and submission to an almighty. And it is this belief in a transcendent reality. If you like, the argument that since the Creator is one, creation is one, that calls for a tolerance which is a higher tolerance than some of the other ideologies that one might name. However, this is a fact that in the modern world there are many political and economic tensions which can provide the undercurrent for dispute and discord, which can often take a religious veneer. But it's very important that one should draw the distinction between where the belief is involved and where the belonging is involved. And I think that confusion happens more and more in the case of the Islamic world, where the real issues, which can be political and economic injustices, which are issues that are shared by many over here. But if you take out the prefix Islamic, I know many civil society groups, many NGOs would be working towards those. I think, therefore, I welcome this initiative where one is able to reach beyond the confines of the conference center and reach to civil society groups to develop a common agenda where people of faith, different faiths, or for that matter, no faith, can work together on these issues which are important for humanity at large. And I think the simple sound bites, which unfortunately sometimes the media creates, does not help this debate.
Conrad
Reiser, can you agree, go along with that, from what Nizami has just said, without any problem whatsoever? I think that the few of conflicts that we actually talk about have religion at their root. Religion or religious loyalty are simply instrumentalized in these conflicts. In nearly most cases, it's usually a question of economic, social, or political conflicts, power conflicts that can be identified locally. But religion or religious loyalties used to generate or stabilize certain group identification and to mobilize it, then it's true, religion is a very, very dangerous instrument. Can I pass this question on to Prime Minister Aziz, this question of abuse? Mr. Aziz himself was the target of an attack 3 years ago that killed his driver, and 7 or 8 other people who were in the close vicinity were killed, and 50 people were injured seriously. So you really experienced this very, very closely, and you got away with your life really by the skin of your teeth. So what is your point of view about this abuse or misuse? What are you doing to fight it in your country?
Yes, thank you. I think misuse or exploitation of innocent people, whether it's on a religious platform or any other platform, creates dislocation in society and leads to extreme behavior. We must step back, though, a little. Why do people get exploited? Why are they vulnerable to be misguided by elements who want to disrupt the peace of the world? I think, by and large, whenever you look deeper into this issue, it stems from what I said earlier, a feeling of deprivation. Mm-hmm. Denial. What is deprivation? Deprivation is not necessarily denial in one particular area, but it's a very holistic concept. Denial of justice, denial of rights, lack of any economic empowerment, lack of a voice. It could be a combination of things. It may be religious, it may not be religious. All conflict is not religion. But sometimes religion is used as a platform to reach the hearts and minds of the people, to exploit them for somebody's ulterior motive. Mm. So what we have to really be alert and share and talk openly about is that what is the challenge facing us? The challenge facing everybody in the world, whether in Switzerland, whether in Germany, whether in Pakistan, is to make sure we win the hearts and minds of the people for the right thing and keep them away from the wrong thing. No society, no geography is immune from extreme acts and violent acts. If you go look into history, you pointed one example just recently in this meeting. But there are many others, whether it's Latin America, North America, Asia, Africa, Europe. Over the last several decades, we have seen extreme behavior, sometimes logical, sometimes illogical. Why is that? It is because people feel angry. People feel they are not getting what is due to them. Sometimes they are right, sometimes they are exploited. So when such a situation exists, what is the responsibility of all of us? The responsibility is to look at the problems, try to find a solution, and tell the people that violence will not get you where you want to go. Look at the Ireland example just now. There was a lot of violence, and I won't go into the conflict. But in Northern Ireland, I mean. Then through political action, through winning the hearts and minds of the people, we got away from that scenario, and today there is peace in Northern Ireland.
Darf ich Ihnen hier noch eine Anschlussfrage?
May I then add another question to that? It's a secondary question that will be of interest to everyone. You've played a leading role in the overcoming of this conflict in your own country. So the question is, why are you being used as a target of Al-Qaeda? Is that because you are using the platform to work together with other politicians to bridge this, or to build a bridge with the Western world?
Let me tell you about Al-Qaeda. And yes, they were behind the attack on me, but the real issue is Al-Qaeda was created because of the Afghan conflict, Afghanistan. Let me just share with everybody how this happened, very briefly, if you allow me. First of all, Afghanistan was attacked by the Soviet forces. That's how it all started. When the attack took place, people in the world said, we will help them, the Afghans, defend their sovereignty and integrity as a nation. No religion at this stage. As a nation, the integrity and sovereignty of Afghanistan was violated by the Soviet Union. So what happened is countries got together from different faiths, and they put together a group which would help the Afghans fight the aggression. And many people were recruited from all over the world. They were trained and sent into Afghanistan. mostly from the Middle East. Right? That's how, when the Soviets withdrew, they were defeated, they withdrew, the people who brought these youths to fight the Soviets also disappeared because their objective was achieved. So these people couldn't go back to their own countries because their countries wouldn't accept them. They thought they were doing the right thing, fighting next to the Afghans against the Soviets, and suddenly their sponsors had disappeared. That then became the birth of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. What happened then? Afghanistan imploded, and there was no government, no serious government there for a long time. And Afghanistan disappeared completely from the radar screen of the world. All of us, we in Pakistan could not afford that because we are next door. We have 1,700 miles of border with Afghanistan. So we had to deal with them. But the world forgot about it. Then 9/11 happened. Suddenly Afghanistan reappeared on the world radar. And then all these forces, Al-Qaeda, etc., who were fighting the world, why were they fighting? Because they were neglected, they were deprived, and they were exploited too. They were exploited by elements who wanted to destabilize the world, or had some political views, or had some other differences. So, then Al-Qaeda started opposing anybody who wanted stability, peace and tranquility. Pakistan said that we are against terrorism, we are going to join efforts to fight terrorism, we are going to build peace, security and prosperity in Pakistan. That's why they attacked us, because they wanted confusion, chaos and mayhem in Pakistan. No country can allow that, no sovereign responsible country. So we opposed that. That's why they attacked the president and myself both. And by the grace of God, we escaped. Now, why did this? What was our response? Our response was better security, trying to identify root causes, and then economic empowerment. You see, if people have a hope for a better future, they feel tomorrow will be better than today. Their life will be better. There is a light in the end of the tunnel. There is no sense of hopelessness. Then they can be channeled in the right way. We did that. Today, Pakistan is one of the faster growing countries in Asia. The income of people has doubled in 5 years. Doubled. So they are feeling, okay, this peace, this security, the government's reforms, the government's efforts to fight terrorism is improving my future. And my children's future will be even better. That then brings peace and gradually things. But let me also say, sir, that in every society you will have a small minority which will be extreme in their views, and they may express them in a violent way. That is where we have to be alert. You remember Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City. There was no religious angle there. He felt maybe upset with the world, he felt frustrated, and he acted in an irrational way. So those things will happen, we have to deal with them, but by and large, if we can show people a better future, if we can counter anybody who's exploiting people and converting their hearts and minds to negativism, hatred, discord, lack of harmony, that is what, and here what is needed is leadership. When leadership is there and people are told, don't listen to this, this is the right path, that is successful leadership. So it's a combination of all this, and that is what we are all trying to do, sitting here together or wherever, building harmony, building cooperation and peace and love.
Mr. Prime Minister, may I also put this question to Konrad Reiser? This question of leadership, this is closely connected with the responsibility that churches should assume or could assume, has not been assumed in the past. So where do you see the possibilities of sharing, or rather strengthening the power, the strength of the churches? Where do you see the possibilities? Well, one has to understand that there are very, very different traditions of leadership amongst the various varying religions. In the Christian environment, the religious organizations have a very clear-cut hierarchy, are well-structured, with a very clear identification of leadership positions also with a very distinct awareness of authority. But that is not really the tradition in Islam, nor in the Hindu community, and even less so amongst Buddhists, the moderator. But is the leadership actually being taken on as a responsibility nowadays, or do you think that much more should still be done? Of course you can still do more, you can always do more, and one should do more, but that's not a problem of leadership. There are an infinite number of groups where religious leaders, and I was one of them, or was termed as one, meet. And it's always basically the same people who meet, and they have the same convictions, even though their origin is different religious background. And they get on very well together. They are also fully committed in favor of specific measures of conflict solution, interreligious councils that were set up in West Africa, in Nigeria, that now have been set up in Iraq, interreligious councils, that is to say, or interfaith councils, that is to say, bodies in which religious leaders can meet and help to promote conciliation. And they've become one of the main forces in stabilization. But what I see much more as a problem is that we are too obsessed by the question of leadership, and therefore completely forget the individuals, the human being. I would like to contradict the Prime Minister a little bit. It's not enough to just tell people. People themselves need to have the possibility of saying things themselves. So the society should be able to organize itself independently. If there is no self-organized society between, on the one hand, the political world, and on the other hand, the religious community, a space where all the opposing views can be voiced without any problem, then, of course, it is very possible that underlying conflicts will flare up, and then these religious differences may be abused to bad, evil purposes and ends. May I then also ask you whether you actually assume this responsibility at the grassroots? In the last few years in Germany, 4 to 5 million people have left the church, Protestants and Catholics. On Sundays, the Protestant churches are often empty, so very little is really happening at the grassroots level. Do you see this differently? Do you think that the Protestant and Catholic churches are very committed and organized at the grassroots? Well, there are peace groups in Germany, there are environmental groups, there are peace policy groups, and their members are usually very young people, are very committed, very religious, and are very active in their church. Obviously, you can look at these grassroots in different ways, but there's certainly not a lack of this very specific commitment at the local level. Ms. Diarmuid, could we perhaps also talk about this leadership issue with you? This reversal in the conflict in Northern Ireland, this murderous conflict between Catholics and Protestants has been ended thanks also to some who previously were termed terrorists.
Things that was very important in the Northern Ireland peace process was when those who were even clearly involved in terrorism came to the realization that today it was possible for them to achieve their aims not just by peaceful methods, but it was better for them to do that. However, for that to be possible, and this was quite an amazing part of this process, it had to be clearly said, your political aim is a legitimate one. Now, it's not easy for a government in London to say, to be secessionist, to want a united Ireland outside Great Britain, is a politically legitimate aim of somebody to carry on in their country, but it was recognised, provided it was done by peaceful means. Secondly, there had to be a political framework in which this was possible. in which people felt that they were going to be listened, they were really going to be part of the process, and that this wasn't just political window dressing. Again, it came back to the idea of ownership. Now, in this process, an extraordinary thing happened. Moderate people appeared, who everybody respected, and they fell by the wayside. And a more extreme group came in, and they fell by the wayside. Now we have this situation whereby the possible First Minister in Northern Ireland would be Reverend Ian Paisley, who was always considered an extremist. His companion would be Gerry Adams, who was clearly an active terrorist. But these groups have come together, and in many ways people tend to like managed peace processes, in which the less comfortable ones are left outside. But that doesn't work. You must bring people to a sense of ownership and to identity. And where religion is closely linked to identity, one has to enhance people and say, you are part of our new different type of a future for Ireland. I've now Archbishop in Dublin for 2 years, and I'm Archbishop of a very clearly multicultural society. And one of my challenges is to see that the new Islamic immigrants we have in Ireland, that they have a sense of belonging, that we don't make the same mistakes that were made in other countries, that we don't allow ghettos of dissatisfied people to emerge around our cities. And one of the things there is to bring everybody into a process of education, but education for involvement, education for participation.
Darf ich Sie hier unterbrechen?
May I just interrupt you very briefly? Thank you very much for that explanation. Great, Hala. Many elements and factors have been described and explained, and ways of how to get out of extreme situations, how one could strengthen the position of the church. Now, do you think that the political world also has a contribution to make, or do you think that the church should have a more active role to accelerate these kind of processes, also dealing with the radical elements? I think that is the role of both. It's very helpful to all the religious communities and churches when it is possible to view this opinion, see this need of being part of something greater, and to bring about this dialogue, as Mr. Reiser has just said. But I take it a step further. I believe, and I think it was touched upon, this European history. Europe started with Westphalian peace in 1648, and I will not go through the whole history since then, but Europe then understood that the various religions would have to be taken into account after the 30-year war, because 1/3 of the European population had died a violent death during that war. And I can draw a parallel from this to the Northern Ireland more recent past, where people simply realized that it couldn't go on this way. The religious communities had promoted this kind of conflict, and that was the same before 1648. It was the religious communities themselves, the churches themselves, who had fueled the conflict, and this was then taken on by the political level. But on the other hand, it's also the religious communities that started this whole process of conciliation. Now, the fact that religions, the different religions, were taken into account after this 30-year war was also followed by, 200 years later, the way in which nations were also considered in different ways. After 1945, after the Second World War, when suffering had reached an unimaginable level, the same steps were taken. Nations were then included in this international community of nations. And I think the third twist of the spiral then took place in the 90s in the Balkans, and here it was not at the level of nations but at the level of the ethnic groups. And I realized that there were these three circles simply because I tried to bring about this process of peace in Bosnia and in the Balkans for 5 years. So the ethnic groups have to also be made part of this organization, but religion gives the basic pattern for the integration of the nations, for the integration of ethnic groups. So the question that we are discussing here is the most central one to the policy of peace. Can I give this question on to Farhan Nizami? Farhan Nizami, Great Hala seems to have indicated what the next steps could be to get out of this conflict situation. Now, from your point of view, the scientific point of view, from your point of view of studies, do you think that this would be feasible? Would this be an alternative to what we are seeing today?
There is no other option. It goes without saying. I agree that there are particular lessons that can be learned from history, but I think it's also very important not to fall in the trap of thinking that the history of different societies have to be a mirror image of European history. Well, let's be honest about it. Certain cultures have had greater difficulty with difference, and other cultures have not had that problem with difference. There have been, in the Muslim world, there have been many pluralistic societies historically, and they did not have a problem with difference. Dare I say that, say, for instance, in Australia, shall we give the example, there had been a problem with difference. You go and talk to the Aborigines, they might have a different view because the difference was not accommodated. This is not to say that everything is sweetness and light in the Islamic world today. Of course there are problems, but one should not think that the history of the world would be a mirror image of European history. I think all historical developments, it goes without saying, would have to be rooted in the context in which these things happen. I think the Muslim world, of course, has gone through a particular historical experience during the last 200 years. There is a divorce between authority and power. And until that is restored, you would continue to have problems. I think it would be fair to say that politicians get interested in things when they become a problem. Mm-hmm. I think what religious leaders ought to do is to anticipate those difficulties and to come up with the moral agenda that our respective faiths ask us to stand up for equality, for justice, for all those issues which are top of the common humanity agenda. But I think in all this, what worries me the most, and particularly these days, is the prejudice and the ignorance which seems to have taken over. Of course, for instance, when you talk about terrorism, there is no doubt that terrorism has to be combated and it has to be confronted. But it has to be dealt with as a law and order issue. It has always been that, and that is what it is. To extrapolate from that a cultural pathology in which an entire civilization and an entire people could be tainted with that, I think not only doesn't help us to solve the problem, but makes it worse. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I think one has to recognize that different societies have a different flavor, a different discourse. In Europe, you can have Christian Democrats. I'm sure that in the Islamic world, we'll have to learn to live with Islamic Democrats, if you like. Mm-hmm. I think the political discourse in those societies would always, despite whatever our leaders might say, would be sensitive to the cultural context in which they operate. Now, it is a difficult process, but it is very important that well-meaning people make efforts to build those bridges of understanding, which in a sense would be strong enough to bear the weight of our differences, and also have correct information and knowledge about the other. Because that is essential, and that's where I think, and considering that I am in the field of education, I believe that education has the most important role to perform, to disable our prejudices so that ordinary people can understand the issues and see those beyond what we see on our television screens or what we read in the newspapers.
Let me pick out one thing that you said. you were saying that political action, if you get a problem, when you look at the international sphere in which you are actively engaged every day, do you see the first beginnings of an improvement in the situation? Because it's been obvious for some time that we're not making any progress with the conventional approach to dispute settlement. There is a need for a new approach. And what has been described, do you see that as something that could be implemented in your political practice?
Yeah, I think we have to adapt and adopt to our own requirements. Each country or each situation is different. Each challenge is different. Let me just make 2 points here. First of all, the issue of leadership and getting people at the grassroots level to go in a certain direction or mold their thoughts in the right way. Leadership is a catalyst to get people to think rationally. We all have the right and the capability of thinking individually. But what does leadership provide? It provides one platform with rationale, with whatever influences the minds of the people. And leadership, let me hasten to add, is not just political leadership. There's religious leadership, that has a major role. There's business leadership, there's civil society leadership, and you can go on and on and on. So, on the leadership issue, I would say that, in my view, today the world has a leadership deficit. Because if we had stronger leadership in the world, and no names will be mentioned, perhaps, and I say perhaps, dispute resolution would be easier, would be more moving faster in the right direction. Whenever disputes have been resolved, take Ireland again, I don't mean to pick on Northern Ireland, but since the issue has come up, I would submit that leadership involved in the dispute resolution was able to convince the minds and hearts of the people that the future of Northern Ireland is better served by a peaceful settlement. Senator Mitchell came in, he had a whole effort, he talked to all the stakeholders. These stakeholders, the leaders, he didn't go and meet every Northern Ireland citizen or the different groups there, but he talked to their leaders. They then sold it further and further, and a result was achieved, a problem resolution happened. There are other problems which are festering, and the leadership has not been able to come to any resolution. And that is why I would still, again, disagree a little bit, that leadership is very essential. That doesn't mean it stops down. That doesn't mean you order people, this whole room, get up, stand down, stand up. No. But it is the art of convincing, because this collegial approach is a sign of leadership too. And it is not just political. To win the hearts and minds of people, everybody in this room, I assure you, will be able to be convinced in a different way. One approach, one size fits all won't work. So I think leadership has a major role to play, and we will, the whole world is probably suffering from a leadership deficit. We hope that deficit is removed so we can get on with better dispute resolution.
Ich bin überzeugt, meine
I'm sure that's a good key word for the questions which are going to come towards us before we do turn this over to the audience. I'd like to ask briefly our panelists once again about a subject. Should religions be criticized? In the past, there's been a very violent argument about this. So can I ask Archbishop Martin, should and can religion be criticized?
We talked here about the pathology of religion, which came in the 30 Years' War, the pathology of nationalism, the pathology of ethnic groups. We're now finding a new focal point for pathology, and that is the clash between the global and the local. In the global world, people need an identity, roots, community and culture. And this can be a good thing, or it can become pathological. And in this we have to live with different sensitivities.
Aber darf
And
Kritik geübt werden?
criticism is valid, but it must be aware of the sensitivity of others. And if we're all going to live together in this new world with its new challenges, I think you do need a greater sensitivity. The cartoon crisis, for example, is one where this was put to the test, in which different sensitivities of different groups, in many ways, in our own West, came under challenge. And it will be useful to look back and see the lessons that we learned from this.
Würden Sie
Well, would you also say that religions can be criticized in democratic societies? Do you think there are any limits to be placed on the criticism that may be leveled against other religious systems?
Well, I think there is a distinction between the believer and the belief. I think there is every right, as it were, to criticize the actions of people. But as a Muslim, of course, what my religion teaches me is not to say anything wrong about the religion of others. So that in that they might say something about your religion. And what the Quranic injunction is that, when you reach that point, as it were, to you your religion, to me my religion. And by the way, this is not a turning away. This is not the boundary from which you turn away. But having secured the boundaries of faith, you build the bridges to exploit the common ground that exists between faiths. So I think there has to be greater sensitivity, as the Archbishop says. I think the cartoon issue certainly highlighted this. But I think it is important that in a globalized world, while we have not yet, as it were, in personal terms, come to terms with what has happened around us, we are not able to face these realities.
heißt dann greater sensitivity?
Well, does that mean more restraint, greater restraint for all groups involved in this? Is that the recipe you would recommend?
Manners and no double standards.
Gret Haller?
Great Haller. Would you go along with that? Future forms of dealing with these problems? Needs there to be more restraint or good manners? It's not just a question of forms. In matters of faith, I think that criticism should not be exercised. By contrast with that, in the political sphere, when demands are made which don't come from the religious context, that there needs to be a readiness to deal with requirements or demands that are coming from different religious groups or out of political contexts in this public space, which we have already mentioned. If the public space is curtailed, is shrunk for religious reasons, then it must be criticized, because in order to protect peace, the most important thing is to protect the public space from the various views, the various religions, so that they can meet there in the public space, so that they can discuss and dispute there. Certain decent forms need to be maintained, but there need to be forms in which people having different convictions can discuss together, and that ultimately expresses itself in the political process of legislation. Konrad Reiser, could you briefly comment on that? How far may one go in criticism? How far do you go? Well, I agree that what you have portrayed, this is the basic structure on which religious freedom is possible, because only if religions can assume that there is mutual respect for integrity, only then is it possible for them to enter the public space, the public area. But there must be the possibility of mutual criticism in the public space. But this must take place in respect for the integrity of the other participants in public discourse. And if that integrity is injured, then there should be clear rules for rejecting criticism that does not fit the bill? Well, looking at these Islamic communities that are living across Europe, do you see a coming together in future in this direction? Can you imagine that a different tone is going to emerge or going to be taken? I can't talk about all the Islamic communities in Europe. I know too little about this, but where I've observed the situation a bit in Germany, I see the initiative taken by the German Interior Ministry to promote a public and open dialogue with the Islamic community. That's an extraordinarily positive development, and that is also judged to be very positive from the Islamic side. But it is with them that the discussion must be conducted, not about them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, says the moderator, the time has come for me to invite members of the audience. There's a gentleman there in the middle who's asking for the floor. So perhaps if our colleague could go right there with the microphone. In the third row, clearly visible. Could you perhaps briefly introduce yourself and then keep your question reasonably short?
Fazul Rizvi, I'm from Pakistan. We in the Muslim world, we feel that the West is not doing enough to protect the misuse of religions. Like if a crime is committed by a Muslim, it is immediately labeled as an Islamic terrorism. And when a person of some other faith commits a crime, it is never labeled as a Christian or a Hindu terrorism act. Why is that so? Thank you.
Diarmuid, Martin, würden Sie diese Frage...
Martin, would you like to answer that question?
Catholic and Protestant terrorists as well. And it's very easy to throw a religious title at, and I think it's always very misleading when it happens. One of the difficulties is looking at the political solutions we have towards integration in our Europe. We have different models. The French model is very different to the British model, and neither of them are perfect. It's not always going to be easy to arrive at that integration. It will require. If you look, for example, at some of the British terrorists who were born and schooled in Britain and present themselves as Islamic terrorism in some case, these are failures of systems that have been there. It's not a failure of religion. It's a failure of the model of integration that has emerged in societies. And again, it's however linked with frustration, with inability to feel ownership and to feeling belonging in the society in which you live, and the type of easy use of religious terms to cover phenomena which are much more complicated, and politicians can very easily fall into that trap.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Further questions? There's somebody down there who has asked for the floor.
Hello, I'm here representing the school of the International School of Geneva, and I just want to say my father is from Iraq, and my mom's from Saudi Arabia, and I grew up in the Western world, and I spent many years there. And me being a Muslim, I understand that there's many similarities between the Christian world and the Muslim world and the Jewish world, and even in the Quran it says that we must respect the Christian religion and the Jewish religion. And I believe today that I look around and I see that many differences between the religions are exploited. And I believe that if we stop concentrating on the differences today and really exploit the similarities and concentrate on the many similarities that are involved in these religions, it'll leave the prospect for mutual integration possible.
Vielen Dank für diese Frage.
Thank you for that question. Mr. Aziz, would you like to answer that question for us?
Thank you. Yes, actually I agree with the questioner. I think we have to, and this goes back to the previous debate, we have to look at religion as a unifier. Even if we have different faiths, different religions, we must focus on similarities, because the similarities are much more than any differences. Substantively, they are very similar. So if we take that approach, then you will see that the tensions will not be there. But if you take the approach that a particular faith has some lot of negatives and we are superior, then we are in trouble. The fact is, everybody's faith is sacred. It must be respected. We must draw out the good points and then bring people together on that front. If we try to always think that our faith is very different and it's not just faith. Many other factors come in: ethnic background, racial background, income disparities. It's a very complex subject. But I agree with the questioner that we must look for similarities, because the similarities overwhelm any differences. Many times the difference is merely in our minds, and we have to clear our system and look at faiths, the whole area of faith and interfaith harmony as a positive, as a unifier, and that will obviously result in all of us coming together even more. And all prejudices will reduce, if not disappear.
Vielen Dank. Ich nehme
Thank you. There's a second question coming from the International School of Geneva, and the question there is: what role do the media play in today's circumstances in heating up the perception of conflict, because they really only report on quasi-terrorist acts, but they don't show them in context? Gret, you are a passionate reader, writer, publicist. How do you see the role played by the media in the current situation? I'm not going to start blaming the media for everything. They operate in the overall circumstances, and particularly the economic circumstances. The increased cynicism or cynical view that the media really only they go where the money is. Well, we saw that particularly the case in the Balkans, where I could really see how it operated. Where attention was paid, where the blood was flowing, and then the money went in the same direction. This is a cynical view of media activity. But if that really is so, if that's a natural development, then the public space of which I have repeatedly spoken, and which is of the utmost importance, if the media, because of the economic overall situation, they wish to they no longer feel responsible if that public space isn't maintained through concentration. If media are not regarded as fulfilling a public function any longer, but are seen solely in economic terms, then there comes a point where we need to start talking about the basic democratic right to be properly informed, and whether that right is any longer being exercised. We slowly have to reckon with the fact that if we don't discuss this issue, then the work of peace, the peace, is going to be restricted, is going to be curtailed, because of the overall circumstances that are being set. Well, are you doing enough to ensure that the media is giving enough of the backstory, enough of the context? Are they doing it too little or too much for your own particular target groups? Well, one can be disappointed about the very little attention that our media colleagues are devoting to all the information which is reaching them. I can only draw on my own work in the ecumenical sphere, but I can say that for a long time now, it isn't to do with the readiness. It's not in a failure to. It's not in an overall failure on the media. The media are, of course, selective, just as we ourselves are selective. Well, the question is it up to you? Is it because you have too little interest in the context or in the... Well, I can't answer that so easily, says Mr. Kaiser. the church people do everything within their power, within their resources, in order to keep the media informed. But if there's no readiness on the part of the media to actually grapple with issues which don't fit their interests, and if the editorial policy in relations with freelancers or free journalists, if they prescribe particular positions, well, look at radio, look at the major dailies. Very often there is a high degree of commitment to dealing with these issues, but they don't actually have the opportunity to do that, whether this is on television or whether it is in the major daily papers. Or if they do, they find that what they write or what they say is so cut down, it's so heavily edited, that the conflict of interests, that it loses out. It's only where there is actually conflict that it gets properly reported. Well, thank you very much. In Konrad Reiser, well, you've seen that was a very passionate response, and at this interface between media and religions, clearly there is still considerable potential. Further comments, further questions? Lady there, over there by the curtains.
Hi, my name's Louise Obermeyer, and I too come from the International School of Geneva. And this question is based on discussions which we've had in class and which has contained a lot of different cultures. And it's a result of the Danish cartoons. The question is, in light of the freedom of speech which exists in our world today, how accepting do you think people would be to the argument, we didn't know? And how do people respond to that in the people who have been attacked?
Gret, möchten Sie die?
Gret, do you want to answer that question? Martin, do you have any response to that comment?
I think we've already heard sensitivity and good manners are also important about the way we go with one another, and the realization of the fact that we have freedom of speech, but freedom of speech is there not really to insult people. We have very clear legislation in many countries of hate crimes, again showing but in the long term, it's the sensitivity of people themselves rather than overall legislation which will respond to this, and the way in which if offence is taken, the way in which we respond to it, not by an arrogance saying, well, look, we have a right to say what we like, and no sensitivity to the fact that people are genuinely hurt by something. Mm-hmm. We have to build a society. This won't only deal with religions, and in the long term, we have to understand people who are hurt. We can always say, well, I wouldn't be hurt by that. That isn't the question. It's the person who's hurt we have to try and understand, because they are the people who have been wounded.
Lassen Sie uns hier gleich noch.
Well, let's move to the other side here of the panel. Mr. Reiser.
No ethos of people in the media. And in many countries you have media councils, that is to say professional organizations of people who are responsible for media reporting and who follow possible misuse of the freedom of press, the freedom of speech, the freedom of opinion. I think that is a way, rather than trying to enforce legislation, to build on the sense of professional responsibility for a constructive use of the vital right of freedom of speech.
Gut, hier haben wir jetzt für die
We've had some very nice answers for the International School of Geneva. There's one lady here who has another question. Perhaps you could stand up so that you can get the microphone.
Hello, my name is Monica Aguirre, and I am Mexican. I am also part of the International School of Geneva.
Sie haben uns quasi infiltriert hier.
Well, the International School of Geneva has infiltrated us here.
When I say that right now we are growing up in a world full of violence and war and conflict, both civil and international conflict, and you have talked about this lack of leadership in the world today as well as in religions, different religions. So my question is, what effect do you believe that this is having on the youth being surrounded by these conflicts? As well as, do you believe that it is dissuading us against becoming religious for fear of the conflict that would later follow us if we did become religious?
Vielen Dank für diese Frage.
Thank you for that question. Who would like to volunteer? Who of the panelists would like to break the ice? Konrad Reiser?
Es gibt zwei.
There'll be two answers.
That it's the young people themselves who are made to fight most of the violent conflict. It's not the generation of their parents or their grandparents. It's the young who are drafted into the groups that are fighting. So society is misusing the youth in order to act out conflicts that should be resolved in a different manner.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Mr. Aziz?
I think when it comes to youth, then the question as I understood it is, would that detract you from going towards religion? My view is that religion, we all have a faith. I assume that is the basic assumption. And religion gives you peace. Religion, and in life one must learn to be at peace with oneself. And that, if you can achieve that through religion, or whatever other means you can, you will be a happier person. So I don't, as was just said, many people use youth to exploit them, to make their point, because they are perhaps considered more vulnerable. Where the youth have to demonstrate their strength is not to be used unless they are really committed to a cause, and try their best to understand the rationale behind any issue, bring out their points of view as you are doing today, but not feel that you will be used by anyone. I think youth are very smart, they have very rational minds, and they will never be exploited. But religion is something very personal and sacred. But I don't think that this approach would take you away from religion. In fact, I would submit that religion will allow you to be at peace with yourself. You'll feel better. You'll feel as a better person because you will stick to certain values, certain principles which will guide you in your life.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Who else would like to put a question? Someone at the back of the room who has raised his hand several times already. Would you stand up, please?
My name is Fadi Bayoud. I come from Lebanon, but I live in Switzerland. I have a comment about the panel. I see that the panel is like preaching religion. I can't see anyone who's against religion on the panel. A comment for Mr. Nizami. You said that the problems nowadays are a matter of belonging and not because of belief. I know that belonging is a major problem in religion, but if I believe that by killing someone I go to heaven, is this belief or belonging? And for Mr. Prime Minister Aziz, you're explaining the way Al-Qaeda was formed. I think you missed one part. When the Mujahideen were recruited to go to Afghanistan, they were told that the Soviets are atheists. So if you go there, you will fight the infidels. So Al-Qaeda was recruited based on religion. Thank you.
Gut, diese zweite Antwort.
Yes, the second part of the question was rather a comment. Perhaps you could just respond to the first question, or the question which was the question.
Well, I'm sorry if you found what I had to say as preaching. That's one thing which I was not trained for and I don't do. I am a student of history and I was just trying to outline for you how one should study religion. It is very easy, and particularly in the modern world, in the West, it is very easy to take a rather simplistic view about religion as being the cause of all problem, and you put it out and it will just disappear. religion has a way of coming back. It doesn't disappear. If somebody believes that by killing me they are going to go to heaven, obviously that's a law and order problem. But I will tell you that they don't just have to believe in a religion to kill me. They can kill me even without believing in a religion. There is, and I think the way this thing has been simplified, the whole issue of this, or whether it is the struggle against law and order issues, or it is what we see in our television screens, it's not simply a matter. Yes, of course, religion is used and manipulated and exploited, but also there are deep-rooted economic, historical, and political considerations which should not be left out. And if I may just come back to some of the other points that were made, because I think the only hope is with the younger generation, with those from the international schools and others who are here, because I think to the extent that they are not really burdened by the prejudices and the simplistic views of history that we hold, or people before us, I think there is a lot of hope. Yes, there is media which is good and bad, and I know that we should not be blaming that, but I hope that the younger generation has means at their command to go over the shoulders of good or bad media. And what I mean by that is the internet. And this is going to transform life in manners in which we have not fully appreciated yet. Religion is not going to go away. I think it is important to understand how one comes to terms with it. And yes, if I am in a preaching mood, I would say to you, it's not less of religion that we need more of religion. And if we have more of religion, we would understand that many of the things that are being done in the name of religion are not religion exactly.
Gut, also eine außerordentliche
Well, that was a highly committed response and answer. Gret, will you like to add to that answer? I'd just like to go back very briefly to what Mr. Nizami said in connection with the fact that we should not be so Eurocentric. That, I think, is really important. You said that Europe had a problem because of difference and differences, and that there were other parts of the world which didn't have this problem culturally in the past, or historically speaking. I think that with everything that the West has exported, including the national state, with all the problems that this caused, but this is the kind of law and order system that we have, well, the West should not export this problem that it's always had with differences. So if we talked about this more, then we would find a path to solve these problems better. What I'm saying is that we should be aware of this in the West. Those parts of the world to which this could be exported also have an interest in not have their own models be westernized. I think that is a very important thing. Thank you, Gret. The Supreme Authority has allowed me to admit another 2 or 3 questions because we started late. Who would like to have the floor? Here in the front row, a gentleman. Please stand up so that we can bring you the microphone. A bit of patience and you'll get the microphone in a second.
Guten Tag, mein Name ist Etter.
I'm called Etta. I'm a Swiss. As a gut feeling, when the Archbishop was speaking about this process of reconciliation in Northern Ireland, gave me a very special feeling. So I wanted to ask him the following. Does one have any idea why all this happens? That terrorists can suddenly approach one another, shake hands, and become friends. Has this been publicized enough? Do you think that enough publicity has surrounded this from your point of view? Well, thank you very much for that question, because it's a very interesting one from other point of view as well. It's possibly an approach of a solution for the future. That is, say, integrating terrorists in the process of peace and conciliation. Can you answer this briefly?
We saw something similar in South Africa Again, anybody who went round South Africa in the hard times of apartheid said this is impossible. And yet people rose above, as I call, the tribe, and said it is possible. We need politicians who have the courage to do that. We need religious leaders to do that. We need community people to do that. And the interesting thing is, they're the ones that history will remember. History will never judge those who were embedded in their own closed world as being the great people. And this is where religion should give the possibility to people. If you believe in the transcendent, if you believe in a God who has created people equally, this will be part of the opening process. There's one thing I keep stressing when you talk about the unity of humankind. The story of the Good Samaritan. When we talk about the story of the Good Samaritan, we always think of the man who did good. What do we know about the person who was lying on the road? It's an important thing. All we know was he was a man. He was another human being. And you responded to him precisely for that reason and no other reason. If religion can generate that feeling of needing to respond to the needs of others, then they can rise above the things that divide us. And we have examples of that. We have it in religion, we have it in other areas as well. But I believe that religions should be asking themselves, are we doing that? Is that the future? Because if we don't do that, there's no future for us either.
Thank you. Now I've been given instructions that the time has come to an end. Prime Minister Aziz has to rush off to another meeting. He's being controlled, remote controlled by all sorts of people in the wings. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for having taken the time and the trouble to take part in this open forum, for having responded so very personally as well. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best. I would like to thank all the other participants, the panelists, for their very honest and candid answers. Maybe we could issue a kind of an appeal from this open forum. Trust in your own strength, ladies and gentlemen. Trust in your own personal influence that you can have and that you do have. And taking such personal influence can have much greater effects than we would assume. So thank you very much for having come here, and spend a pleasant evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.